Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Eating at a Meeting, the podcast that talks about safe, sustainable, and inclusive food and beverage experiences. I'm your host, Tracy Stuckrath. And this week, to almost wrap up Food Safety Awareness Month, I am in the house, or in the house with me is Meg Walker. I do this wrong. Meg Walker from Made by Meg Catering. Hello, Meg.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And I have to tell everybody the story. So I heard you speak back in 2017 at the Special Event Convention conference in Long Beach, and you were talking about food safety. And
that was 5 years ago.
Yeah, craziness. And to find you, I actually had to zoom in on one of the pictures that I took to find out exactly what your company name was. And lo and behold, I was already following you. So I'm so glad we connected and I found you.
That was a great email to get, that you were such a great student in the class. You had photos of the presentation on your phone still. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, and Apple phone makes it really easy to search by venue, like where.
Oh, that's right. I just discovered that.
Yes, it helped a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, so as I said just a second ago, it is Food Safety Awareness Month, and I think it's really important for caterers. And this is what I thought was really pertinent about your class is like, what do meeting planners need to know about food safety, and how can caterers help them? What should we ask? So, just what do meeting planners need to know? People that are hiring you.
Well, first of all, I think everybody, anyone who does events, right? We're planning events, is that they want that all they know is they want a smooth event, right? We want something that looks beautiful, that our clients are happy with, all the things. But the other huge important piece of this is what happens after people leave an event, right? We want to be sure that the food that they ate leaves a delightful memory and not a lasting impression, the wrong impression. So
yeah,
food safety makes a huge difference. So we want things to go smoothly, of course. And a lot of the stuff that comes with the food safety issue and topic itself really is about what happens behind the scenes. So it's not the cuter plates and glassware and delightful silverware. It really is the things that go on the invoice that are more expensive, that nobody can see, but they will experience.
Well, and planning an offsite event, which is mostly what you do until you got a venue a couple of years ago, but that adds a whole nother level of issues or challenges that brings to managing food safety. Can you talk about a couple of those things?
Absolutely. So as you know, and Tracy, you're in the business, so you know all the lingo, right? So it's right. Off-premise and on-premise. Off-premise and on-premise. So on-premise is when we have things like hotels and venues that come with all of the wonderful catering equipment and food kitchen items that we all know and love, right? In our own homes and at our venues. So you don't see any of it. But if you're off-premise, you have to design an entire kind of system of keeping food safe and presenting it. So it's not just warming it, it's making sure that it stays cold until you're ready to serve it. So from the off-premise perspective, we have to be sure that we've got a place to hold everything, right? So we've got to have plenty of refrigeration and know everything that's going in the refrigeration. So I always like to tell planners, make sure if you're sending me a wedding cake that you don't think it's going in the fridge. Because if it is, we need to add another fridge. And making sure that we have enough space to properly prepare things. So if you have just a tiny little bit of space and a couple of tables, you're asking me to prepare raw chicken, and then I have no place to turn it over or no place to wash dishes or create sanitation, then we've got other issues. So off-premise creates an entirely different set of circumstances that have to be discussed with your caterer to make sure that they have everything that they need. And maybe if it's not on your rental invoice, that it's on the caterer's truck, and you know that that's coming as well.
Well, and that brings a really good point, because the other day, and this is kind of bringing it home in the home kitchen, I was in our refrigerator and our hard-boiled eggs had frozen solid. And I looked at the refrigerator, which some refrigerators now tell you it was down to 32 degrees, which is too cold for a refrigerator, right? It should be. And so it froze. And so just putting stuff in a cooler, that's not what a caterer needs to do. I mean, you have to keep it below 41 degrees to keep it cool, correct?
Right. In the food safety zone.
Yep. And then what is the high temperature to keep it something warm? Is
Oh,
it?
geez.
I
I have
know. I
to
just
look
had
at
I
no,
text you and I
41 is
put
the high.
41 is the high. Yes.
Yes, and
Yes. Okay.
30 around 32 is the low because at that point
Okay.
you start freezing things, so it's in that smaller temperature. If you look at any refrigerator, it's within that range.
Right.
Um, don't laugh, but we had a little birthday party over the weekend for my husband out in Minnesota,
Uh-huh.
and we ordered some tacos, and the
Mhm.
tacos stayed in the Schaefer's, and by the time it hit, I cut it off at 3 hours, but really you can hold it for 4 hours when it's above
Mhm.
that 42 degrees or 41 degrees, and I my kids came up and asked me for another taco at the end of the party, and I said, "Sweetie, I'm sorry, I can't give you another taco." And literally everyone else went up and got another taco. It's been 4 or 5 hours out on the buffet, and they all said, "Well, I don't care." And I said, "Well, good for you. You have an adult stomach, and I'm sure it will be fine, and you're gonna laugh that I want everything in the right temperature, but you will not be laughing if you're sick the next day." So I never serve anything, including in my own home, to my own children, to my husband. And even if people think, oh, it's fine, that piece of pizza has been left on the counter, even at home, I won't do it. And a lot of people do it. I'm just not that way. And you should be that way from a professional perspective and all the time, right? So if anything's held
Mhm.
for longer than 4 hours above that 41 degrees, you really can't serve it.
Right. That's that is so important because you wonder why buffets can't stay out for a certain amount of time,
Right.
why you need to, change them out, keep them at right temperatures. And that's a really important thing if you're going to do a party on a beach, right? In the middle of the summertime you know, or in a freezing cold area, right? Whatever you need to do, right?
Right. What's interesting about the food sanitation world and the off-premise catering world is that you have this range of expertise, right? So you
Hmm.
have these wonderful off-premise caterers, and perhaps they're starting out earlier in their career, and then you've got, the really amazing, huge national brands, these caterers, right? You're thinking of like the Sodexos of the world and
Hmm.
all of that. Now they have to do things, they have to make sure that they have a full plan of everything that happened to that piece of food or, piece of
Hmm.
chicken or whatever, right from the delivery, the warehouses to the delivery to the actual location and otherwise. And these smaller, kind of less corporate caterers, this off-premise caterers, they don't have those kinds of regulations in place because they haven't reached that level of business maturity, but they're still operating by the same food safety standards. So
Hmm.
like if you go to a hotel, like one of my favorite things is on the coffee, like at the coffee station, right? We put out our milks, all our different types of milks, and we have planners who are having all day meetings, and they're like, okay, well, you're paying for all day coffee. And then they go, why is it more expensive? Well, one, it's more product, but two, I've got to replace your milks. Because if I don't replace your milks or keep a timer on it, suddenly you've got milk sitting out for 4 hours plus, and people could get sick. They might not be able to finish their meeting. So if you go to a hotel, you'll see your milks on ice, or you see your servers heading out there in certain intervals. But that's
Right.
one of those things that meeting planners push for buffets to be open longer. They push for more coffee. They push for, the milks to be out longer. And that makes sense. But we have to realize like it is more expensive because we have to, one, have the proper holding temperatures out on these kinds of stations. And two, we have to charge for more product because it has to be turned over where your guests will feel that effect.
That's another really good point because you think about even the coffee creamers that aren't even put on ice, right?
Right.
It's out there and the break is only for a certain amount of time. And
Right.
because that time it can only be out of that temperature um,
Safety zone.
safety zone. Thank you. And I do have my Serve Safe certification. I should know the terms. But outside of that safety zone, there is that. But we as a meeting planner, we take it for granted that our caterers know that. And so we need to then trust our caterers when we're telling them to
Absolutely.
do that. Exactly. Yeah.
Right. I think that's one of those givens, right? We
Right.
hire someone and we trust them, or we like their food,
Hmm.
or, hey, we like their price. Then we have to realize like this comes with a huge level of trust, right? One,
Right.
I'm trusting you're going to show up with the right equipment, or you're going to tell me how to really look into our rental order. And then also, I mean, that's the given, right? We have to have that base of knowledge. We have to have a serve safe. Very rarely do I have clients or meeting planners ask me for my serve safe certification. It's like one of those things. It's like asking if someone, if you have your driver's license,
Right.
you're like, well, yeah, but it is
Right.
also
Yeah.
kind of insulting. So you wouldn't ask. But at the same time, that's one of those things to have in the back of your mind as you're reviewing an invoice or reviewing a process with a caterer, is realizing like, hey, I can't have this out as long, or I need you to review this invoice for my rentals to make sure you have everything you need, because that's their area of expertise, not
Hmm.
necessarily every meeting planner. And that's,
Right.
I mean, they have to be experts at everything, right? Like this,
Right.
you have to be able to trust people.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Because we don't know, like I worked at Atlanta Food and Wine Festival, and you don't necessarily know everything that the team, the culinary teams or the chefs that are going out there to work in the tasting, and I work the tasting tents, what
Yeah.
do we need? We need the hand washing stations. And how many hand washing stations do you need
That's
per the
right.
number of, chefs that you have out there, right? And
Mhm.
where should they be positioned? And hey, yeah, they might not look pretty, but can you make them look pretty? And
Right.
you can't hide them either.
Right,
So yeah.
exactly, you can't hide them. And you know what? It's funny that you bring that up, right? They're not pretty, but
Mhm.
at this point in our understanding of the event world and our global conversation about health, people wanna see it, right? So,
That's
it
true.
was interesting as we were coming back from COVID and at different events, we went from wearing, like, kind of the clear gloves at events, we went to
Mhm.
wearing black gloves and
Okay.
blue gloves. I wanted everyone to see that my team was wearing gloves. I wanted them to see, "Hey, I'm wearing gloves when I'm doing tray pass service." Because and normally I would tell them, like, "You gotta take your gloves off before you head out onto the floor to do tray pass appetizers," but people were really began to get very comfortable by seeing that kind of safety equipment. I would
Mhm.
hide Of course, we would hide our cleaning sprays and Lysols if we're doing service, but if you saw a bottle there, were you that mad that they were using Lysol to clean your surfaces during
Right.
COVID? Like, that's the kind of stuff people
Yeah.
are fine with. A hand washing station? Oh, yes, we need to see that.
Yeah.
Isn't that strange?
It is. And I mean, I did a survey just as COVID hit. I was like, how many meeting planners had asked about food safety practices before COVID? And 70% of them said never. And that scares me because and I actually have to be one of those people before I got my serve safe and got into this side of the food and beverage aspect of events, but I never asked that question before. But to
Right.
me, and I have taken pictures, and I do it in Vegas because when you're walking through MGM, the restaurants actually have their score on their hostess stand.
Oh,
And I
that's
think,
interesting. I didn't know that.
yeah, but you don't go. I don't know how many people have asked you about your health inspection score, Meg?
Large corporate clients do, and they can look it up. In Los Angeles County, they can look it up and every inspection you've ever had. So that
Okay.
is, I mean, first of all, your kitchen should always be spotless and clean and wonderful, all the things, right? That's your given. But it also is an extra layer of understanding, like, hey, some of my much bigger clients, I've gotten them because someone else got a B. And they said, my current caterer under contract got a B, and that violates their contract. It's a breach. And now I'm coming and looking for someone new. So
Wow.
you can't even rely on the clients that you've got under contract if you don't have the right standards, even in your home kitchen, which is where the sanitation matters as well, not just at your
Right.
events.
Hmm.
Um, you know, you got to be sure they're in a licensed kitchen and it's clean. So
Right.
it's out there, right there for everybody at all times.
Yeah, and I don't think all states publish it like LA County does, but
Right.
you can get them from the local health department. But
Yeah.
I would just ask your caterer that you're hiring,
Yep.
right? Yeah.
You
And
should.
I learned that from you in that session at special event. So I thought it was really
Yeah,
important, and I teach that now all the time. So I think that's great. So thank you for that. Now,
absolutely.
how do you make food safe? What are the steps that you have to do that a meeting planner should understand better? You've touched on a few things, but
Well, and as I mentioned before, it really brings it home. We're talking about trust, right? You
Mhm.
are, I believe that I have this saying, you are who you are wherever you are. So it's your all of your small actions and your big actions at once, right? So if you have someone that you like doing business with, they show up with integrity in everything that they do, they're going to do that in their business as well, right? Behind closed doors.
Mhm.
So it starts having safe food. Number one starts with having great suppliers and having reliable suppliers and people that you trust that follow those kinds of steps as well. So we use a variety of different suppliers, but none of them are people who don't have, they're not small private on the side sellers. They're not just, giving me food from an unlicensed kitchen, all of that fun stuff. You realize, like, there's several major national food suppliers. We happen to use US Foods.
Mhm.
And then we use several smaller purveyors that are also large in our area, but maybe not nationwide. So, number one, you need to have someone who's willing to spend the right amount of money to get the right product. A lot of people can cut corners. They're not necessarily arriving in those temperature controlled trucks.
Right.
That's not something every client can see, but I would say that food safety, in my opinion, really begins with where your food comes from, and knowing that that person is willing to spend a certain amount of money to make sure that you have the right food. Some people are, that they're cutting corners, but they're probably cutting corners on where they get their food as well. The other place I really think is important is in transport. So especially if you're an off-premise caterer, your food is coming from their kitchen, which should be a licensed kitchen that you can look up their address. If you're ever worried that you're working with a caterer who isn't, necessarily on their feet yet, or not, doing all those things to get all their licenses, you can look them up by address and make sure that you can see their health inspection. And that happens when someone's newer in the business. Maybe they're still working from their home, or they're, in some states that is completely legal, and that's fine. In California, that's not. They have to have a licensed kitchen, depending on where your local laws. And then making sure you have reliable transportation for all of the food coming from that licensed kitchen, then coming out to your event. And once it arrives at your event, someone who understands that, hey, we're not throwing things in coolers. There's no way you can get everything you need in a cooler for a large event. It has to go into refrigerators, and it has to be enough refrigerators. And I absolutely understand that space is at a premium. It's the one thing I fight about most after budget is space for planners. And I understand that there's a lot of competing priorities. But making sure that someone's saying, hey, I really need not just one fridge, now I need two, and I realize that's an expense, but again, that's one of those things you want to be sure you have.
Right. Well, and one of the things that I asked you pre-show was an example of a situation that negatively affected what you do. And I loved your answer of ovens that don't work, refrigerators that don't turn on, events, catering kitchens in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
And I actually toured a kitchen. I toured a space recently, and the catering kitchen, you couldn't cook in it at all. It was a table and where you could clean your dishes, but you literally had to bring it all in with you. But to me, it wasn't even a big enough space to bring in any hot boxes and things. And the elevator was the same elevator that the guests use.
Oh, that's so fun. I love that. I always call it high expectation, low accommodation. That's the tagline of catering. So I'm going to give you a tiny closet to work out of, and you have to do it in front of guests. And I promise you're going to be unseen. That's just not true, right? So you want to have, whenever you're working an event, make sure that your caterer sees the space. And if they can't make the actual walkthrough because there's, just schedule issues, give them a video tour, really have them contemplate and think it through. Sometimes people are just more interested in booking the job than thinking about, okay, how am I going to do this successfully? Right. And then what you get is an email afterwards from the planner and the caterer kind of going at it going, hey, this service wasn't what I expected, or there was food safety issues or whatever. And then everyone starts pointing fingers. Well, let's just look at it ahead of time. Thank you for the revenue. Thank you for the business, but we want to be sure we can execute it properly and that we have the equipment that we need. And I think one of those, you touched on that, briefly when we're talking about ovens that don't work, or refrigerators that don't get cool fast enough, or something like that. You have to also work with a great rental company, someone who you trust to, maybe if the oven isn't working, that they're going to send you a tech who's going to fix it. And I get that events happen late at night. I get that they happen on the weekends, but that is the job of the rental company to come out and fix something, or at least talk you through, maybe there is a user error and they can help you fix it. I've had rental companies where the client thinks they're saving money and they will not pick up their phone. They have no emergency contact line to help you fix equipment, and then they won't refund you the money. So in that sense, you now can't cook your food, or you can't hold your food. And then the other thing that's really important for planners that I would just love to share that has evolved since 2017, and the last time we talked about this, Tracy, was when the rental company shows up, the first thing they should do is plug in their refrigerators. Just drop those off, plug them in, and get them down to temperature. And I can't tell you how many times my catering team has stood there waiting for them to finish dropping the rental order. And you go, well, this is a hot refrigerator. That's not going to do the thing it was supposed to do. And now we're 2 hours from event. So when you're talking to your rental companies, they're coming to set everything up, have them go, okay, just go get those refrigerators out of the truck. If possible, get them plugged in, and then come and give me my plates. Cause you don't need your plates just yet. I know you want to set the room, but plug it in.
Well, that sounds like a moving truck, situation. It's like the refrigerator should be the last thing on, and it should be the first thing off.
If possible.
If possible. Yeah. When you're getting there, that's a really good hint, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah. But it also is like planners like to do their site visits of places, and we're doing site visits of places, but we're not necessarily we haven't picked our caterer yet. And
Mhm.
that venue gives you 5 different caterers to choose from,
Right.
and each of them may be a varying level or whatever, but hopefully that venue knows what you all need and work with, but at
Right.
the same time, hey, meeting planner, you need to talk to those caterers.
You
Yeah.
have to talk to the caterers, and you have to give your rental company enough time to set up, and if they're going to be late, definitely talk to them about the
Mhm.
refrigerators, because sometimes
Right.
you're the last part of the truck to show up, and that I
Right.
get it, everyone's been in
Yeah.
that position. So, yeah, know your caterers.
Well, and then now I'm thinking timeline, your event production schedule on the day of event, or the day, when are you setting up? Do you have, should that refrigerator be in the day before? And does that actually mean that you actually have to have an extra day of rental for setup, et cetera? Yeah.
And I understand those costs definitely add up. So when you're talking about the same day load in, which is sometimes what venues require, you have to buy an entire different day. And that, I mean,
Mhm.
that can get really cost prohibitive. And then suddenly you're like, okay, well, I don't want to use this caterer, or I don't want to use
Right.
this venue. And then everyone's out of that business. So
Right.
you could just say, like, hey, we need that extra hour of setup. And instead of
Mhm.
buying a whole other day, we get an extra hour, and make sure the rental company is on time, and make sure that you're dropping things in the right places in priority order, instead of just, hey, this is, what comes next,
Right.
because I'm nervous, I don't have my plates yet.
Okay, so a question that we chatted beforehand was, how do you get the most out of your food? And I have another tangent of that, with going in our current situation with food supplies.
Mm.
What ways can meeting planners save on their food and beverage at the moment? So let's talk about, how do you get the most out of your food first? And then I
Um,
just want to put that out there so I don't
no,
forget.
I think those are two really good questions. Food costs have gone up by about 40%. And if you
Mhm.
look at the CPI index over the last year, what you see is that the food prices have increased more than our gas prices.
Wow.
And that's alarming, right? And
Mhm.
including everything from our gloves, foil, saran wrap, everything else, sometimes things have even doubled in price. So personally, how I get the most out of the food that we get, would be to do, I call it family meal or a staff meal.
Mhm.
We make sure that we use all of our extra items. So if we order a case of something, I'm a caterer, so I don't have like a regular food menu where I'm absolutely going to go through that entire case of sweet potatoes or that entire
Mhm.
case of chicken for that particular weekend. So what I'll do is use that to feed my on-site team, and
Okay.
we all cook for each other 3 days a week, and make sure that everyone gets a meal instead of ordering out or things like that. So that's how we use the most of our food. We also make sure that we leave food for our clients if it's still temperature safe. If it's not, then that has to go back to
Mhm.
our dumpster, which is no fun, and it makes me really sad. But I'd much rather not get anyone sick and then leave a bunch of leftovers that they can't eat.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And looking at it too, depending on where you are,
Mhm.
hey, can a nonprofit pick it up if it's still time and temperature controlled, to
Totally.
make sure, yeah. But
Yeah.
that takes a lot of coordination.
It does take a lot of coordination, and it depends on your local laws. So we've had
Mhm.
a lot of people approach us about that as our laws sort of change a bit, and we realize that Los Angeles, if you haven't heard, does have an issue with a lot of folks experiencing homelessness,
Mhm.
and that is something that's important, right? We have to help our community, so we do get those calls and requests, and it also is up to the client, right? So if
Mhm.
they've paid for a certain amount of food, and then we have to authorize that with them, and that's a unique caterer's perspective and something that's local to us. So I would encourage people to look at local organizations that can take that extra food, or if it's my on-site team, maybe I have up to 25 catering staff members, and if it's something they want, like, I'm gonna not take these garnishes back from the bar, and I'm like, who's gonna want lemon slices? And then someone goes, I'd
Right.
love to make a lemon pie. I'm like, great, please take
Right.
these home.
Yeah.
But to address your question about rising food costs and how we can get the most out of our caterers and our food partners, um, I would I would even talk to them. A lot of people have a clause that says the price will go up if the items on your menu have changed in price dramatically. I don't have
Mhm.
that clause in mine, which would have been really useful right now.
Yeah.
Um, but it will start going into effect, and what you can do as a meeting planner is say, instead of accepting a price increase on the exact menu, say, okay, what are your options for keeping the price the same? So if it's, okay, I'm going to use this, like, and it's the most random stuff in the world. Like, okay, salmon's now 3 times the price. What?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but now I can find, snapper or cod or something else. And instead of saying, hey, I accept this price increase, just say, what are our alternatives to keep the price the same?
That's a really good point, because it could be something that's in season, that's local, that you can do that
Totally.
with, and your vendors, and where you can get it from, but that's having that candid conversation about
Yeah.
your cost.
Definitely. And I think that's a lot of times people just want to be upset about a cost increase from the caterer to the planner and just say, like, hey, let's get on the phone. Would you mind making a phone call to your supplier? Is there anything that they have just a ton of right now? What can we do about this? And that's the partnership that it takes to make sure that the client has a great experience. And if people can be a little bit flexible, I bet you there'll be something delicious that can be made.
Yeah, because you don't have to stick with it 100%, unless it's like somebody's diehard, we have to have this food here.
Right, right.
I mean, hopefully nobody's that determined to have that kind of food there, but you got to play with what's going on in the market.
Right. And that's what bigger budgets are for, right? It means that
Mhm.
I'm less flexible. This is what I want and I'm going to pay for it. But as
Right.
our budgets get smaller, that requires some flexibility.
And actually another really interesting thing, that bigger budgets, you can, hey, I've got to fly the lobster in from Boston because I can't get it locally, or whatever
Yep.
it is, right? Yep. Or asparagus, because asparagus is really only in season, maybe not in California, in the spring, right? Right.
The cost of
Yeah.
asparagus certain times of year, I just am like, what were you thinking? Why did this go
Right.
on the menu? Like, this is so expensive.
Exactly. Now, I did see something about, like, somebody suggested, one chef suggested, when broccolini was on the menu, they
Yeah,
just switched it out with broccoli
right.
instead, because it's less expensive.
Totally. It's less
Yeah.
expensive and everybody can relate to that moment where everything's really expensive. We've all
Right.
been to the supermarket. We know what's happening to all of us.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So, what questions do you want meeting planners to ask of you as it relates to food safety?
So many things I want to talk to meeting planners about.
Yeah.
But the truth is, as a caterer, we're all so grateful for the business always, and we want to accommodate the client, and then our secondary client, which is the planner, right? So we want to be as accommodating as possible. I think the one thing I would really want is just to make sure, like, is this everything you need? I want to be sure that you have what you need to make this food safe, and ask them, like, hey, would you mind looking at this rental order and make sure it's what you need? That is the one thing I feel like doesn't happen. I make a list of demands, I hear grunting, and they're like, okay, fine. And it's like, but like, it's just a good exchange, right? This is in the name of professionalism and the client. So I think it's just, hey, what do you need?
Yeah. Oh, I like that. And last week I was chatting with a different caterer, and listening to his podcast, and called Catering What the WTF, or WTF. But it was hysterical. But what it made me really realize is that meeting planners, our clients are asking us to pull really big rabbits out of really tiny hats. And then we
Yes.
go and hire our vendors like you, and we ask that of you as well, but we don't take into consider, and we get so annoyed by them by asking these things, but you probably are doing the same thing of us.
Oh yeah, we're all just trying to make it happen together.
Right.
And I think
Yeah.
that's what's so wonderful with my favorite event planners. They're always like, okay, how can we make this all happen? And they're the ones who see the full pie, right? They know what
Mhm.
slices are and the one that they want to send to the decor companies and all of that. So I think, it's kind of like doing foundation work on your house. All you know is that there's something under your house and your house isn't sliding anymore, right? But you
Right.
don't get to see that money. It's below the house, and I'm actually doing that work in my house right now, so it's a little
Yeah.
painful. So do that
It
work, you
is.
can't
Yeah.
see it.
Yeah, yeah. If you watch HGTV and they tear down a wall and they're like, "Oh, the window's leaking," right? We need to fix
You're
this
like,
whole thing.
"Why? It's not
Yeah,
fine." Yeah.
exactly. And especially when you're doing an off-premise event. Now, and let's bring that back into here, because during COVID, you acquired a venue. So now you do both.
Yes.
What are the pros and cons of doing both?
Well, it's so many things come to mind. But it's what I really love about doing both sides of the business is also having an appreciation for the other on-premise venues who are doing, trying to accomplish everything we're trying to accomplish. And frankly, the field has narrowed greatly for off-premise caterers, for venues, and also, even the best hotels in our area, they've got to narrow their field as well based on health restrictions. So what it really has created is a sense of community to realize that we have a high demand industry and people who are really ready to get together and have a great time and have all those long put off celebrations, and whatever we can do for each other, just to say this is what it costs to do this business, and not to undercut each other, or to say that I can do this in coolers and I don't know why this person needs an actual kitchen.
Right.
Realizing there's a level of professionalism that we all stick by, and there's just been a great camaraderie here in California.
That's fantastic, because it is it and I saw that in Atlanta when I lived in Atlanta. There's a good, group of people that they feed off of each other, pun intended, right? And share the good, the bad, and it does make it a stronger events industry across the board.
I agree.
So I asked you a question that I typically ask everybody, in advance, but what is your favorite food and beverage? But I love your answer. So.
I said that my favorite food, and this is true, is the next food, because we learn something with every meal, whether that's gratitude that we got a chance to eat, or that we learned a new flavor, or things like that. It's my favorite food is the next food, just like my favorite breath is the next breath.
That's awesome. And the next birthday, the more birthdays you have,
That's
the longer
right. And the
you
next
live.
birthday, right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, I love that, because you don't know who you're going to sit down with at that meal, or what new flavor you're going to taste and say, oh my God, I have to have that. Right.
Have to have it. Exactly. Or
Yeah.
I need to have this at my restaurant or on my menu, and I've got to put my own spin on it. Like, food is such a beautiful, like, evolving masterpiece. So that's what I love about food and hospitality.
That's fantastic. And the final question that I always ask everybody is, what does a safe, sustainable, and inclusive food and beverage experience mean for you as a caterer and as a person who eats at events?
Right. Well, it's that the experience for me is just the cycle of humanity and business, right? Like I talked about, that it comes from a safe place, that it's coming from our producers who are honored with proper pricing and proper labor practices, and then coming to us safely and at a price we can all afford, and then being served to as many people as possible. And whether that's the people who are on one side of the table or the other, from the people who work the event to the people who are our clients, and then making sure that that food, completing the circle, can go to someone who can use it, and really allow for as minimal waste as possible. I'm really excited that our local area is offering composting and asking people to please put their food waste into special bins. That's new for our area in the last year. And then it goes back to the earth. So we're really evolving, at just a lightning speed, which is wonderful. So that's what I think.
That's awesome. One question, I don't know why this just popped into my mind, but food allergies. I'm doing a session at IMAX in a couple of weeks, and on finicky eaters, or fickle eaters. Where does food safety play into that with you?
Well, that's a whole other level of personal, in my opinion, right? People are coming to you because they want to be at your event, and it's almost like they're in a position that like my two children are in, right? They're 2 and 4, and they're looking to us to feed them safely, right? They're actually non-dairy eaters, which people laugh at, like, please get me the vegan cheese and the almond milk. And they're 2 and 4. Like, well, the difference is that they break out in a rash, or they're uncomfortable in their stomach, and all that. And that's the same thing that we go through as adults, right? You're going to someone's event and you're expecting someone to have honored your request without making snarky remarks, and making sure that they handle things correctly. because we all need to eat, right? And that's
Mhm.
so we can go on and enjoy the event. So I feel it's a different level of personal, and it requires the respect of the food preparer and the company and the planner to say this matters, not because this person's being picky or being
Mhm.
asking to be special or for attention. They just want their food to be correct and not to make them sick. So
Oh, you just said that so well. Thank you.
well, I'm gluten free. I've been to a lot of events. I've been gluten free for about 10 years. And a lot of people think it's like, oh, it's such an LA diet, and your
Mhm.
kids have to have almond milk. I'm like, laugh it up, Chuckles. Like I'll just leave early. Like I can't stay if you can't honor my requests. And
Right.
no one wants to have anyone laugh at them. So,
No, and depending, maybe that's a foundation event, right? And you're
right,
supposed to be bidding on different trips or whatever to raise money for
right,
that foundation, and you just left
right.
because, yeah.
And it's a huge, like what I typically find is the people who are most vocal about it are those who are in leadership positions, right? So if we do a huge event for a big corporation, typically the C-suite will send on their dietary restrictions because the team wants to make sure that the entire C-suite stays. Big
Right.
things are happening. We spent all this money on these kinds of events. And so they want to know what's going to make a VIP as comfortable as possible to stay. And that has to start, from the planner. It has to start
Mhm.
from the caterer. Make sure that they're going to accommodate your requests.
That's a really good point. I remember a story that I heard third party is that the CEO who was vegan at this event was handed just a couple of carrots on his platter, for their awards banquet. I'm like, okay, do you think you're ever going to get that client back?
No,
Right? No.
no.
Right?
And
I'm
if
like,
that's how you're treating the most important person in the room, how are you treating the regular folks in the room?
right.
And what's everyone's experience? So,
Mhm.
like I said, you are who you are wherever you are. We have to, are you accommodating to them? Are you open to, trying to meet at several different times? Do you say yes when they ask you for something? And it boils down to just everywhere you need accommodation. And that's what hospitality is, right? It's meeting
Right.
people where they are.
Right. Exactly. I heard somebody said this to me in a session last week in MPI, Ohio, but it's like accommodation is for one person, but planning for accessibility is for everyone.
Right.
And I really like that. And with along with what you just said is like, it has to be that accommodation has to be incorporated into the overall planning process so that it becomes accessibility for
Right.
everybody. Yeah.
Yeah, and we've carefully developed a lot of our special menus as well, and we have some people on our team who also have, very restrictive diets, and that's been really helpful, right? And so a lot of people take that as adversity or someone being difficult, or this isn't the smooth event that they're not going to want just what I'm serving, right? Well, I take it as like that's gold. There's gold in those hills, right? You're learning
Mhm.
something. How can I plan something that, the next person who needs an accommodation has, this
Mhm.
request. So those meals have to be interesting, and we have to have a variety of choices. And, I don't know, everyone's like, well, if you're vegan, then you should have brought your own meal. Like, well, I will agree with you if you have so many restrictions, you have a page long list of allergies. In that case, I would recommend you bring a cooler to your event, and you're used to that, right? If you have a
Mhm.
really restricted diet, you are used to that and you don't want to take a chance with someone who may
Right.
screw something up and really cause you serious harm. So, but the vegan accommodation, people get really touchy about that.
They do.
It's
They
ridiculous.
it is just in
Yeah,
this day and age. Let's just do it, right?
exactly. Just do it.
Just do it. Okay, Meg. So I've just put your website up here, mbmcatering.com.
Yes.
Where are you located?
We are located in Redondo Beach, California, in the South Bay area of Los Angeles.
Okay, awesome. And where do you cater?
We cater all over Los Angeles, and our venue is called La Venta Inn. It's in Palos Verdes Estates, and it's going to turn 100 next year.
Oh, wow. Okay, what does does the refrigerator in that 100-year-old building work?
Actually, the original one does not. It was a really cool swamp cooler, but that's now a storage room. We have our own walk-in. Had to make some updates for sure.
Gotcha. Well, very cool. When I come out to San Diego next time, I'll just take the train up and come visit you.
Oh, that would be great. It would be so
Yeah.
cool to meet you in person again.
Yeah. Again, exactly. It's been too long.
Yes.
So everybody, it was a pleasure to talk to you, Meg Walker. She is with Made by Meg Catering. I just put all of her social media hashtags or handles in the chat. So make sure you follow her and hire her for your next event.
Hey, we love that. Thank you so much
Yes.
again. What a pleasure.
Likewise, Meg. Thank you. And everybody, next week, I'm going to be chatting about the White House Conference on Nutrition, Health, because it's all next Wednesday. So that's what I'm going to be chatting about on the show next week. So tune into that. And let me know what you want to know from the White House about making our society more healthy and nutritious. Because it's really, really important for us to do that, as well as meeting planners and caterers.
Yep.
So until next time, everyone, stay safe and eat well. Thanks.